Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Sheetz. I'm CNBC's space reporter, and welcome to a conversation here at the International Astronautical Congress on the idea of addressing the evolving needs of a new space economy. I'm very, very pleased to be joined by a pair of folks who are really diving into every piece of what it means to be a part of this new space economy. I have with me Julie Zoller, who's the head of Global Regulatory Affairs for Amazon's Project Kuiper, and then Emmanuel FRANC, Senior Vice President of Arianespace. So we get to talk a little bit about the rockets and satellites that are changing the market and changing the game right now. I want to go back to earlier this year, and this question is going to be for you both. But you signed the biggest commercial rocket deal ever earlier this year with a number of other partners involved, but for your parts, 18 Kuiper launches on Ariane 6 rockets. How is the mutual work going on making those first launches a reality? I'll start with you, Julie.
Thanks very much. It's delightful to be here with both of you. So we chose Arianespace because of their capabilities, their performance, their reliability, their cost, and we're very proud to have them as a partner. And when I watch that film, I just get really excited about the future that we have with Arianespace. They have the right balance of those factors for us, and it was an important decision as well for diversity's sake. As you mentioned, we have 3 launch providers. Mm-hmm. Each one of them brings different strengths to the launch plans for Kuiper. And Arianespace is a very important partner for us.
Emmanuel, I mean, as far as designing the integration side of things, what can you tell us about the work that's been done since you guys made that announcement earlier this year?
Well, maybe before talking of what we are doing since the contract, maybe I would like to come back on the history of this long race, which started in 2019, and the word which are coming to my mind when I'm thinking about this contract and the discussion we had with Amazon is transparency, trust, and smooth. So, as I explained, we started in 2019, and we went to visit Amazon first time in December 2019, and we agreed that it could make sense for the Amazon team to gain understanding of what Arianespace and doing on the market, to invite them in the Les Mureaux, our manufacturing center, and on our launch pad in French Guiana, which was done in February 2020. And I think after that they were a little bit convinced of what was the capability of our solutions. And then after there were several back and forth discussions, and from I would say September 2021, we started active negotiation. And what I want to highlight here is everything has been done over the phone. So you can imagine that negotiating such a contract, a large contract, all over the phone was a challenge. But I have to say that Amazon has been always very practical, and we managed to go through this discussion thanks to the transparency and trust which has been built along this year, and come to the success at the end of the day. The last thing that I would like to say is it's not only a contract between Amazon and Arianespace, it is all Europe who is taking advantage of this contract. It has completely stabilized the exploitation of Ariane 6, and also in terms of employment, you can imagine that all the French and European industry involved in Ariane has been taking advantage of this contract. So a great success, I would say, overall.
Well, it's fascinating to take a look behind the scenes of those contract negotiations going back several years then. Julie, I'm going to dive in a little bit more on the nitty-gritty of how Project Kuiper is going. I mean, when we think about, the state of play, is the prototype launch still on track for later this year?
So our prototype satellites, our 2 prototype satellites, are on track to be completed by 4th quarter of this year. And we'll have them ready for our launch partner to integrate into the launch vehicle on time. Project Kuiper is going amazingly well. I started there 3 years ago, and there were less than 100 people on the program. Today, there's more than 1,000, and I look at the progress we've made on our customer terminal, on our satellites, on our overall network. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And yeah.
I did want to get a little bit into some of the details around the user terminal. I mean, have you guys finalized a design there? Do you have a solid price that you can tell us about? I know you guys have gotten the cost under $500 a unit, which is pretty impressive. But
Yes.
you know, what can you tell us a little bit more there?
So I can tell you that our base customer terminal is about 12 inches in diagonal. So it's quite small, about the size of a laptop. And it uses phased array technology in the antenna. So the transmit and receive sides are overlaid on top of each other, and we've already demonstrated it up to 400 megabits per second on the downlink side. You mentioned price. Affordability is always top of mind at Amazon, and we are driving the price down of the customer terminal well below $500.
That's really interesting, and it'll be, you know, fascinating to go on Amazon Prime and see folks starting to actually buy them. I want to then turn to the Ariane 6 piece of things. Obviously, you guys are working towards that debut launch. Can you tell me, you know, what month that's going to happen next year that you guys are looking at? And then I want to get into some more of the specifics about, you know, the broader backlog and manifest that you guys have been building.
Well, maybe I will not answer straight to your question, but I can give you some hint where we stand. So regarding Ariane 6, the development is going well. The key stakeholder, I mean Ariane Group and the CNES, who are developing the rocket and the launch pad, are validating their system. And if I'm going a little bit more in the detail of the situation right now, on the 13th of July, we had this maiden flight for Vega C, who has completely validated the first stage and for Vega C and the booster for Ariane 6. So that was a complete success. Now we are expecting to start the hot firing test of the second stage of the rocket in the ballpark of 2 weeks or so. It will be in Germany, in Lampolishausen. From there, we have also started to erect the model, which will serve the model test for the combined test in Kourou. We are waiting now for the dummy payload, which will be put on the top of the rocket and the fairing. And after the fairing, from there we will connect the rocket. All the 3Ds and the electronics, plus we will bring the software which will link the rocket with the launch pad, and from there we'll start the combined test. So you see, it's still some stages to be done, but we are still expecting to have a maiden flight in 2023. And normally there should be, I think, a communication, and that is their responsibility from ESA, with the support of CNES, Ariane Group, and Arianespace in the 2 weeks by the end of September to tell us more about when will be the maiden flight. Now, regarding the manifest, I have to say, thanks to the success with the Kuiper, we are quite busy. We have 28 launches secured, 21 with commercial customers, and 7 for institutional. So commercial customer, obviously, Amazon is there, Eutelsat, Intelsat, Optus, and Skyloom. On the institutional customer, we have a Metsat. We have ESA and UPSPA for the European Commission, and we have also CNES for French DGA. So we are quite busy, again, 28 launches secured. And in terms of ramp-up, to make sure that we'll be able to execute all these launches on time, we are planning 2 launches, which is quite challenging, but 2 launches in 2023. And after a ramp-up, which will bring us to 10 launches in 2026 and so on.
So I want to ask just briefly, because you're the sales guy, if I were to call you up and say, hey, I'm Michael SHEETZ, I want to buy an Ariane 6 rocket, you've sold quite a few of these, what's the base price tag you're quoting people for?
It will be what I'm saying to all my customers who are always starting with that. It will be the market price, so you will be very satisfied.
Not a dollar figure, though. I guess I'm kind of ordering lobster then. It's a little bit, when you call to get a rocket, you're getting the market price in the restaurant. I want to change then and move over to the idea of this space marketplace, which is really the broad theme that we're here to talk about. And on the Amazon piece of it, you know, when people think about Amazon, they think of it as a global tech giant. They think of an e-commerce platform. They don't think about it as a satellite broadband, you know, communications network. And that's what you guys are building. So you've been there for 3 years. Why did you guys set out to build this yourself when there are so many LEO constellations, especially in the communications side of things, that are being built right now that, you know, you could have bought services from? So what was the genesis behind Kuiper?
We live in a digital world, and we all have to be connected. And we saw that there was a need that was not yet met. You look at the statistics for the world in terms of unconnected and underconnected citizens, and they remain very large. There's going to be room for a lot of success on the part of satellite constellations, combined with fiber and mobile and other technologies. It's going to take us all to bridge the digital divide. Also, a lot of Amazon's business depends upon that connectivity, whether it's commerce or Amazon video or music. It's all connectivity dependent. So it really made sense for us to be able to provide some of that connectivity. And there was an appetite at Amazon to look at big problems and work towards solutions that are good for the community and affordable.
I want to lean in then on the other aspect of the economy, and this is in your expertise, your wheelhouse, which is the regulatory piece of it. Mm-hmm. What regulatory obstacles has the Kuiper team faced as you've been working through development and getting those first launches off the ground? And additionally, I mean, are there areas that you think the regulatory landscape, the policies that are currently in place need to change? And maybe you can give me an example or two?
Sure. So Kuiper is, as you know, a non-geostationary satellite system operating in the 20 and 30 gigahertz band. And we occupy quite a bit of the spectrum in the upper end of the 20, 30 gigahertz band. And so within the spectrum that we'll be using, there are different regulatory regimes, different sharing conditions between geostationary and non-geostationary systems, different sharing regimes between non-geostationary and non-geostationary. Layer on top of that different countries have different regulatory systems. And so what works for a license application in country A is far more complex in country B and is streamlined and easy in country C. So we have to look at all of that in our planning to make sure we're ready with licenses when we're ready to provide service. A couple of examples I can give relate to sharing between non-geostationary systems, which is a dynamic sharing situation. We are actively involved with rulemakings in various countries, and one in particular is the FCC's rulemaking on sharing between non-geostationary systems. And here we think it's quite important for the FCC to include in its rules what two operators should expect in terms of criteria. We all have margin in our system. What should we expect to dedicate to that kind of sharing so that there can be efficient use of spectrum and competition?
I want to then talk a little bit on the Arianespace side of things. I mean, the rocket landscape and market has just changed so much competitively in the last year with the rise of SpaceX and a number of other launchers coming online. I was just talking to some of the folks over at Firefly Aerospace, right? They're trying to get a medium vehicle off the ground. When you talk about how much both the market competition has changed, but also the demand has grown, how have conversations with your potential customers changed in that time as well?
So yes, Michael, you are completely right. The market changed dramatically. I would say if I compare the previous decade with the current decade, our estimation, after it's an estimation, but we estimate that the market has been increasing by 50%, which is huge. But the type of market is not the same. The GTO market, which was the big market in the previous decade, has been shrinking a little bit. While we see the emergence of this huge constellation market, and Kuiper is surely the best example, which represents roughly 50% of the market. And we have also seen, we are seeing an increase of the market for the small launcher as well. Now, regarding the discussion with our customers are still expecting the same. And I would say even reinforced by the type of market, which means reliability. No one will go to a launcher which is not reliable. It's really the cornerstone of our business. After flexibility, launching on time, and price. And those three arguments are still the same. The difference, I would say, with what was happening in the past is when a customer was coming to us, he was buying one launch for GTO. And some were ready to take risk, to go for a new launcher, a little bit less expensive, more aggressive, because they were trying to penetrate the market. It's clear that as far as the constellation is concerned, when you have to deploy 18 or even more, like a Kuiper or other constellation, these guys does not want to take a risk, a single risk. And here they will come, obviously, to very experienced launchers, and that is the difference. So they are even more insisting on the reliability, on the capacity to launch on time and to be flexible. And maybe the price is a little bit less important because when you invest billions of dollars in your constellation, what you want is the satellite to be in the space, not grounded due to the launcher. So that is a difference. Now there is another point beyond those three main factors, is also the capacity to launch, to be accurate in the launch. And here I have two examples. All know, everybody in this room knows the story of James Webb, for which Ariane 5 has been able to launch very precisely this satellite, and we have gained 10 years of life for this telescope, which is huge as a success. And the second point that I would like to highlight is the maiden flight of Vega C. We have a margin of 15 kilometers compared to the point of injection, and we were 600 meters off. Again, which give so that is also a point which can be of interest for our customers. But the main three drivers is still reliability, top one. After you have flexibility, capacity to launch on time, and price.
Well, it's really interesting to hear that response from your customers now, even in a competitive landscape, which on the price side has changed so much. I could sit here and ask you guys questions all day long, but I'm going to end this conversation before we move to the second half of this session. And I wanted to ask you both, and you, Julie, mentioned this a little bit earlier in terms of how much hiring you've done, but is the job talent pool deep enough for each of your evolving needs, the way that you guys are hiring and building up the amount of Ariane 6s that you need to launch, the number of Kuiper satellites and user terminals you need to build? Is there enough talent out there that's high enough skilled, or has it been a struggle for you guys to find the right people?
We have scaled up very rapidly, as I mentioned, from 100 to over 1,000 in the 3 years since I've been here. But hiring is it's a challenge, and we strive at Amazon to be the world's best employer, and part of that is hiring a diverse workforce. And I loved what I heard Florence say in the session before us. That's super important at Amazon. We think about diversity in the hiring process and in the talent evaluation process, and in all that we do. We bring it up. And just recently, we partnered with the National Space Council on a STEM initiative to bring more people into the space career field. I want to put a plug out there for the regulatory side of things as a great pathway for an engineer.
Thanks, Julie. Emmanuel.
Yes, well, two answers to your question. The first one, in terms of capacity and even including this huge contract of Kuiper, we are sized and we are within our cadence. So we don't need to go to the market and to recruit massively to be able to execute the contract. All that has been planned. We have seen the job coming from a long time ago, as I explained, since we have been discussing for 3 years. So it was not a surprise. We have not been caught by surprise. And I would say that Arianespace is completely staffed and up to speed to execute this contract. The team has been formed. We have already a lot of interaction with Amazon on a daily basis, and there is no issue whatsoever on that. Now, the question is whether since we are quite busy, I explained 28 launch, whether we want to increase the cadence, and obviously we are discussing with our prime, Ariane Group, to see what would be the advantage and whether the market is requesting such a move. And obviously, as Arianespace, we are pushing this direction. And if we go for an increase of cadence, obviously we will need to reinforce the team. And here my answer would be that space is a world of passion. I joined this sector 3 years ago. I'm still a baby because when I'm interacting with people here, they all have 20 years, 25 years, or even 15 years of experience. And you realize that when you join space business, you never leave, okay? And it's an area where you see young people they have the choice between energy, car, whatever, but they want to come to space. So you will always find talent ready to join us whenever we will be willing to recruit. I'm not concerned by that.
That's fantastic. Great to hear from both of you. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm looking forward to the second half of our session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
And thank you, Amazon.
I'd like to invite to the stage National Space Council Executive Director Chirag PARIKH to continue this conversation about the evolving space economy. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm the one thing keeping you from a happy hour downstairs, so we'll make this fun and efficient.
We got to really keep people on the hook, otherwise
Absolutely.
they're out the door. So
I was waiting for my beer, actually. So okay.
no. So I want to start first by talking about, in terms of your experience, you've had so much of the public service side of your career, but then you stepped into the private sector for a little bit. Most recently before this job at the National Space Council. When you think about how the space economy is changing, how the market is changing, what did you learn from that time in the private sector?
Well, first of all, I think it's evident just walking through the hallways, listening to the discussions here. Number one, innovation is all around. There's a couple elements of innovation that I really appreciated. One is we're building a lot of innovation in the space sector for space applications. But the other thing is, and particularly for companies that are not directly space related, there's a lot of technology out there that is applicable to space related elements. And so it's sometimes getting out of our industry to be able to look for opportunities for partnerships, opportunities for innovation from things that are helping other economies within our national and global sector and saying, hey, I can use this as well for space. And whether we're talking about AI, we're talking about cloud, we're talking about just data infrastructures writ large. It's a very fascinating thing. The other element that I found particularly interesting is it's actually a similarity. It's the need to be able to balance your time, your resources, your people, and particularly in the growing space economy, your partnerships. There's no shortage of people who want to partner with a lot of different companies, but which ones do you prioritize? Which ones don't you? And that's really interesting because I don't think I really appreciated the amount of business-to-business partnerships that are happening outside of our government ecosystem along the way here. And then similarly, because of the innovations, not just inside the United States, but across the world, how much international, both business-to-business partnerships and international government-to-business partnerships. So now that I come back into the government, my shareholders now are back to the U.S. taxpayers, to the U.S. citizens, and to our international allies and partners. And so it's a similar type of mantra, thinking about how do I prioritize where we're focused on our resources, our people, and of course our partnerships, both with the private sector, but also with the governments around the world.
Now, you recently visited California alongside the Vice President. You had a chance to speak to a number of space companies out there from different subsectors of the industry. I want to hear what your takeaways and what needs you heard from them and what kind of they were asking of you.
Yeah, so about a little over a month ago, Vice President Harris visited Oakland, California, Chabot Science Center there, where she had the opportunity to meet with a lot of different space companies. And particularly, these are space companies that are really driving the edge of innovation and how we need to think about how they operate, how we work with them, to what Julie said, in a rule and regulatory type of environment. And particularly companies that are focused on unique phenomenologies of remote sensing. While there is a regulatory environment for that, they're pushing the boundaries of how how we should and could operate with them. We talked about, we hear about it so much, so many partnerships right now with the commercial space flight, commercial space station industry right now, and what they're planning and the innovation that they're building as we, at the end of this decade, will retire the space station and transition our services to commercial space station capabilities. And then novel space activities that are not in the traditional worlds of SATCOM and space launch and remote sensing, whether we're talking about refueling orbits, satellites refueling other satellites in space, or in-space assembly and manufacturing, or lunar surface activities, all for commercial purposes. Maybe sometimes supported by government, sometimes for government, but it's a fascinating world. And so what we learned and discovered there, of course, is that we have three regulatory regimes. Julie talked about the FCC from a spectrum perspective. We have NOAA through the Department of Commerce for remote sensing, and then finally we have the FAA through the Department of Transportation for launch and reentry. And what do you do with all these other capabilities? And I think what was very interesting and fascinating, what we learned there, is the need. Sometimes regulations is a negative term, but the need for rules, a framework, and an environment for a predictable, flexible, because you don't want to have for every one of these a different regime, predictable, flexible, and repeatable and consistent type of environment for this. And so 2 Fridays ago at the National Space Council meeting, we heard from a space insurer, and we heard from a space investor, and we've talked to many of them at this point, and they represented a similar perspective of the fact of that helps them be able to invest more into the community. That helps them have a more predictable environment to be able to reduce insurance rates. So really, the task that we have on hand is how do we adapt and bring in all these different types of capabilities to be able to provide this type of framework and rule structure for all this innovation that's going across the country right now.
I want to tap in a little bit more there on the regulatory piece that you mentioned and those three agencies that really, when you're talking about launching, say, a satellite into space, you're going to have to go through all of them in one way or another, maybe not NOAA, but at least the FCC and the FAA. When you talk to these companies, when you talk to investors, was the takeaway, and the thing I hear constantly from executives is that the regulatory framework doesn't move fast enough and things get bogged down and are slow. I mean, from your perspective, is the current regulatory framework effective? And maybe you can give me a specific way that you'd like to see it improved.
Yeah, I think the regulatory framework of having the 3 different regulatory agencies right now is sound. You see how each of them are innovating. FCC recently released a rule about saying, hey, we need to move faster. A statement saying they need to move faster, particularly as we think about some of the debris issues that we have on orbit right now. FAA, of course, has been looking at the commercial human spaceflight efforts, and they've been able to reform their efforts to be able to shrink the timelines in which they're able to get the regulatory elements. And then just probably a couple years ago, the entire remote sensing regulatory regime has changed, which has basically put things into more of a tiered structure at this point, which has really greatly reduced the timeline for remote sensing systems. Now, with that being said, there are a certain number of systems that do require additional scrutiny, either one, because it has some significant national security related efforts that need to be looked at, or two, kind of some of the companies that we met when we were in Oakland, it's brand new stuff, right? And so that takes a little bit more time. So to say everything must be reduced down to like the bare minimum, the answer is it depends.
That's fair enough. And I'm curious then on the other piece of the puzzle for the National Space Council, which has been the Artemis Accords. I mean, over 20 countries have signed on since the Artemis Accords began. I want to understand a little bit more behind the countries that haven't signed on. And I'm sure there's ones that you're interested in having join. What have they expressed in terms of what makes them uneasy or concerned about joining the Artemis Accords where so many others already have?
Well, first of all, there aren't ones that we'd like to have join. We'd like to have every country join, of course. It is an open environment for countries to put on. I think part of it is just, trying to understand, what does this language mean? There is, of course, the element of like, what is the commitment that, a particular nation has to put into this? How does this affect their economy? How does this affect their government perspectives? But in the end, I do believe that the Artemis Accord sets a baseline of the responsible use of space for civil across the world. And we really do encourage more countries to sign on. In the conversations that I've had just in the past couple of days, several countries who have not yet been signatories say they very much would like to be signatories, but they have to work through their own government processes. It's not just the space people who need to sign on to this, it's entire governments that need to sign on to this. And so sometimes it's the articulation of the space industries regarding the importance of a sustainable space environment to ministries and departments and agencies who may not have actually focused on this. So it takes time, but as you see, more and more countries are signing on. Similarly, if I may just say as well, as the Vice President announced, the U.S. commitment to not conduct anti-satellite missile test, debris-forming anti-satellite missile testing, we just had, last week, we had 2 more countries announce their commitment to this, particularly to the governments of Germany and Japan. 2 Fridays ago, the Vice President also noted the fact that, the United States will introduce this commitment into the first committee in the United Nations and hopefully make this a norm across the world as part of a General Assembly resolution. So we try to push on all the different fronts with respect to norms of behavior because ultimately, look, space is a precious environment, and it's something that we must protect because the benefits of space has the benefits on Earth, as we've been listening to, across the several days, listening to different speakers and lectures.
Speaking of Artemis, I want to get into the first Artemis 1 mission and the overall Artemis architecture that NASA has laid out into this next decade. I mean, in the last year, the NASA Inspector General has been very critical, and it's called Artemis program unsustainable given the current approach, 1 lunar crew mission per year at most, ballooning costs. How do you view that architecture and some of the criticism that's been levied at it?
Well, first of all, I mean, not just myself, but I think, our government and our nation, and I hope the world is excited about the Artemis program. I mean, it is really turning eyes back to the value that space has, the importance of space, and truly the inspiration of space as well. The architecture with respect to the launch vehicle, the capsule, lander, hopefully a second lander as the RFP was released recently as well, that's just the beginning part of things right now. And most of those things, until we got to the lander, were really government-run, programs at this point. What we're now seeing, is NASA developing a Moon to Mars strategy, and particularly this week, NASA has convened a lot of their partners, both industry as well as government partners, to say, hey, these are the goals and objectives that we're laying out for the longer term vision of the architecture. And that includes lunar surface activities, that includes cislunar activities at that point. So while right now it may seem like, it's just this rocket that is, we've spent, the better part of a decade, developing along with the capsule, what you're going to quickly start seeing on the architecture piece are several different components, but most excitingly about this is it's not just components from NASA. It's going to be components from international partners around the world. It's going to be from a lot of different US industries across the nation. And I've had an opportunity to meet with a lot of different international companies, and it's going to be a lot of international companies, architectures, and hardwares also part of that. So as that blossoms out, that really helps broaden the perspective of what the Artemis program is about. It's of course about innovation. It's about jobs and industry. It's about inspiration. And it's also, to be quite honest, it's a form of leadership as well, as we're taking on very hard technical engineering challenges to be able to say, yes, we can do this. And similar to the Apollo missions, where people didn't just say, the Americans went to the moon, the whole Earth was saying we went to the moon. And as we go to the moon now, it's not just the United States, but it's going to be partnerships across the world. And so I think in the long term, I think we're going to reflect back on this time and look at the commitment that we made. And I think it's going to have a similar long-term effect that we've had with other space initiatives.
I want to end this conversation by getting your view on the health and the growth of the space market currently. I mean, what concerns do you have about the market environment, whether it's the shift in revenues in satellite communications, whether it's the D-SPAC, frenzy that we had last year? Talk to me a little bit more about how you view the U.S. industrial base on the space side of things and how it's changed so much in the last decade.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because a decade ago I was at the White House and I was on the National Security Council. And a lot of these capabilities were known. We were trying to drive the policies and initiatives towards that. And I think, of course, a great example is commercial crew and cargo with respect to NASA. But so much innovation continues to happen. And it's not just because of government investment. It's also because of private sector investment as well. It's the excitement, but it's also the opportunity for economy as well. And this is no different than other sectors where you have a lot of flurry of activity up front. You have some form of consolidation and mergers along the way. But ultimately what happens is it really helps drive the perspective further. And what we've seen from investments from the capital community has stayed consistent. It's actually stayed consistent with respect to even through COVID, where other economies have slightly dipped. We've continued to see these investments move forward on that. Similarly, from a government perspective, we have invested heavily into the commercial sector with commercial crew and cargo. We continue to invest in that. NASA released the RFP for a second HLS lander. With respect to commercial space stations, over $300 million for FY23 is going to be invested into commercial space stations. That's just FY23. And then even with respect to space situation awareness and space traffic management, we have significantly increased the budget of the Office of Space Commerce. Now, the numbers may pale comparatively to DoD budgets and to NASA budgets, but I think it's an important component because what we're saying is this office has got three functions. It's got its historical function of commercial remote sensing regulations. It has a new function of inheriting the space traffic management mission and evolving it from the Department of Defense to be able to be the commercial and civil interface for that. DoD will continue to do space situation awareness for national security purposes. But number three, and I think this is one that often gets lost, and I'm glad that we have a lot of industry in the room as well as listening online here, especially U.S. industry. It's their job to advocate on behalf of the U.S. industry. And we're hoping that these types of investments will really help grow our space economy from the inside out, but also we know that there are influences from the outside in. And we're really looking forward to the continuous growth where we can partner with them.
The money continues to flow into the space sector, just like you mentioned. And so I guess maybe to ask it a different way is, could you give me what the biggest risk you see to the U.S. space economy and the market here right now?
The biggest risk to our space economy, I think it's just keeping the eye off the, if you don't keep the eye on the prize, right? Like we have long-term visions, we have long-term goals. And space sometimes is slow, space is sometimes challenging and hard. And I think really, we're really trying to look at the long-term investments here. And if we're looking at the year-to-year return, that might be challenging. But I think if we keep our eyes on the future, I think we're going to be in a good shape.
Well, a good piece of advice for a lot of folks who, got to get over those short-term obstacles and make it to orbit, get the satellites working, start delivering data, every little piece of it. So, Chirag, thank you so much for joining me up here. Really appreciate your insights into this space economy and how it's changing and taking your time with it.
All right. Thank you, guys.